Hi, my name is Garen Peterson, and this is my 1990 Catalina 30, the Naughty Dog. I've owned this boat for about 8 seasons now, and a lot of questions come up this time of year in the Northeast of how do I winterize my boat properly? I am by no means an expert, and I'm certainly not a mechanic by trade, but I do most of the work on this boat by myself through learning on the internet and reading books, and this is the process that I take to winterize this boat. First things first, I want to make sure that my diesel fuel tank is topped off for the season. That way there's no condensation that can form within the diesel fuel tank. These are the chemicals or additives that I use to treat the system. I've got Stabil diesel fuel stabilizer. It says under the manufacturer's directions that for storage you should use 1 ounce to every 5 gallons and do not over treat, which is a little different than regular fuel Stabil that it doesn't matter if you over treat. So I've got a 18-gallon tank, and I'll probably use just 3 ounces of the Stabil, which is 1 for every 5 gallons. I use Seafoam. I pour one of these treatments in. It cleans the injectors. It stabilizes fuel in addition, controls some moisture and the noise within your engine, as well as cleans deposits. So I put a whole can of that in, and then this is the treatment to keep growth from forming inside your tank. So I'm going to add those chemicals, and then afterwards I'm going to pour in diesel fuel in order to top off my tank for the season. The diesel fuel additives are in, and after the fact I pour the diesel in. That way, in theory, it should mix a little bit better than adding them after you've fueled up. The engine I've got is a Universal 25 XPB diesel engine. Here's the equipment that I will need in order to service the engine. I've got my secondary filter, my Raycor. I have my oil filter and fuel filter, which are universal parts that I order from the factory. The idea behind that is you can order cheaper stuff and go to Napa or AutoZone or somewhere else. But I know that these filters fit exactly to the engine. They're a couple bucks more. So I look at it as a value added that I shouldn't have any issues with any filters if I'm buying the appropriate gear. Engine oil, manual recommends Shell, or not Shell, but any T1 grade engine oil for this particular engine. Barnacle buster, and I'm going to run that through and let it sit for about 2 to 4 hours to try to clear out any growth that's happened within the engine. And then whatever's on sale for marine grade antifreeze that I use in the boat. And we get pretty cold winters, so I just go with the highest rated, -50. And again, it was on sale, so that works out too. And then I've got my filter wrenches to remove the filters and put the new ones on, and my zinc for the heat exchanger. So because my boat is on the hard, on land, I have to run it with a garden hose to keep the engine cooled while we are operating to winterize. So I've got a raw water strainer that's down here, and I've removed the top, and I've got a hose system that comes up, stuff I bought from the hardware store, and it's just a valve so that I can turn the water on and off in order to get fresh water into the system for when I run it on land. A couple things about running your system on land. You want to make sure that you do not shove the flowing garden hose into your intake. If you put that much pressure rather than letting the impeller suck the water that it needs into the engine, you actually can run the risk of hydrolocking your engine. So I run the hose in, and then I will adjust the control as I get the engine started and how much it's actually taking in. The other thing you want to make sure is that it's hard to see down there, but that your raw water intake, your through hull, is closed. That way you don't lose water going out the bottom of your boat while you're trying to get water into the engine to cool it. I've got the engine running now. It's going to have a water intake line controlled by this valve right here. It's all stuff I bought at the hardware store. Run your engine while it's on land. Okay, so we ran the engine for about 25 minutes maybe. Got it all nice and hot. Got the oil flowing. And now what we're going to do is we're going to extract the oil, change our filters, and get everything tuned up before we winterize it. So I'm going to use this oil reservoir extractor suction machine. You can buy them at any auto store. I got this one at West Marine. And I'm going to go through the dipstick down here to get to the very bottom of the engine in order to suck as much of that used oil up as I can. I got that there. We're going to put the tool down into the engine where the dipstick goes in. And then the rest of this is pretty easy. You can see the oil coming up. And we're going to pump this up and get all of the oil out of the engine. We've got a bunch of the oil. You can hear the suction finishing up. And I like to kind of move the hose around a little bit in there to try to get down as deep as I can to get everything off the bottom of the engine block. Now comes the little bit more of the messy part, removal of the filters. First thing I'm going to remove is the oil filter, which is up on the front of the engine right here on this particular engine. I use a big Ziploc bag along with the filter wrench, so I loosen it and then I get the Ziploc bag underneath it and inside of it so that hopefully it catches everything and creates no mess. I'm also going to take some oil rags that I've got here and lay these down underneath the filter so that if anything leaks down while I'm doing this, it will catch that, hopefully. So here we go. The filter wrench. I'm just loosening up this filter enough so that I can hand loosen it and not spill oil into the bilge. Here we go. Ziploc bag around the filter. And then loosen the filter by hand. And hopefully we don't make a huge mess here. And voila, we got the filter in there. A little bit of oil came out, but not so bad. New universal engine oil filter. I put a little bit of oil on the ring just so that it will seat itself. And once you've got it on there, it spins on nice and easy. Get that hand tightened, and then you can use your filter wrench and get it on there a little bit tighter, not too tight, because you want to be able to get that off in case you need to make an oil change, but you don't want it to be just hand tightened so that it loosely unscrews itself. Okay, now we're on to the primary fuel filter here. It's a universal fuel filter, so we're gonna unscrew that with the filter wrench and replace it with a new fuel filter. Just always remember, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. I think I screw up with that at least once a season because it's really hard with these pipe wrenches to be able to get under there and loosen it in the correct direction, because you feel like you're going left or you feel like you're going right, and you can sometimes bend the filters and get them permanently stuck. So lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, remember that one. Okay, same deal. I've got the Ziploc bag underneath, and that way when I loosen this filter up, it's going to all pour into that bag instead of going into the bilge. And I just did it. I did the righty-tighty instead of the lefty-loosey because I'm backwards right now. Okay, so I got the filter off. There is some diesel in there. I'm not going to reuse this diesel because it's already gone through the system, been filtered, and if there's any contaminants, you don't want to introduce that back into the system. So I've got a little bit of diesel fuel in the cabin here in that tank. I got my new fuel filter. I'm going to fill this up and top it off before I screw it on to keep air out of the fuel system. So I'm gonna pour a little bit of diesel in there and then screw it back on. So you can see I've got a little bit of diesel fuel right up to the threads there, and I'm going to screw that in very carefully, trying not to spill. Again, same thing. I'm gonna hand tighten this filter on, and once I get it hand tightened, I'll use the filter wrench to really get it tightened down so it doesn't wiggle loose. But again, you don't have to do it too tight because that rubber gasket will keep it from moving. Okay, so we got the two filters, oil and primary fuel filter, changed on the actual engine block. I still have one more filter that I got to change. It's down there. It's a little bit more difficult to get at. It's also kind of a bear to get the bowl, the water separator bowl off of the bottom of that, so I do have to take it to my shop usually, and to be able to loosen those in a bench vise. But we're going to do that at the end, and right now we're going to change the actual oil and add new oil. So your engine oil fill cap is on the top of your engine, and that needs to come out. And then we need a funnel, which is right here, and you need your engine oil. I would recommend you read your owner's manual for your engine. Each engine for Catalinas at least, because there's several diesel and gas engines, have a different amount of oil that's supposed to go in. You can also look at your siphon device and see I've got about roughly 3 quarts that came out of the engine until it was dry. Once you've got your oil in there, if you don't happen to know how much it should take, there is an easy way to check, which is just using your dipstick as you're kind of going along. So you add a little bit of oil, check your dipstick, and keep doing that. I leave the dipstick out while I'm doing that so you don't get any oil on the dipstick while it's entering into the engine when you're adding it. So we're going to check, see what our oil level's at. It looks pretty darn good right there, but we'll do it again just to verify. Clean that off. Let's take it back in. And our oil level is pretty much right up to that line, which is a good thing. If you're not familiar with how the dipstick works, you want your oil level right up to this line here. on the edge of the dipstick. If you start getting over, you've got too much oil. If you go under, you've got too little oil. So that's how you check what your oil level line is going to be. And once we fire the engine back up and we get oil back into the filter, we're going to recheck because we may have to add a little bit more oil when we restart the engine before we winterize it. It's kind of hard to see, but there's my Raycor filter down here tucked away. And so we're going to try to loosen this one up a little bit, and then I'm going to go grab a Ziploc bag so that we can pull that off. Make sure you inspect the bowl and just clean out any debris you've got in there. I'm using just a rag. Make sure it's not cracked. Make sure that the valve on the bottom works so you can drain it if you need to, and that your gasket's okay. New gaskets. So the orange one is going to fit inside the bowl, and this darker one goes up here, sits on top of the engine. So this is what the filter looks like, the Raycor 2 micron with the bowl. And then these two pieces screw together. I'm only going to hand tighten this one because, again, it's really difficult to get undone if you use tools. And if you need to change this while you're out on the open water, you don't want to be fighting with it and lose your engine. Okay, same thing with this filter. I filled it right up to the screw hole here. I might add just a little bit more because you want to keep all the air out of your fuel line for when you restart. And I'm going to screw this back in and hook everything up and restart the engine. Okay, the Raycor, if you can see it right there, is back on, and I use the tools to tighten the actual filter on, but the base of it is left hand tightened, so that if I ever have to get that off at sea, I can do that. Okay, one last check of the dipstick before we restart the engine. Looks pretty good. Clean that off. And that level looks pretty good. It's right on that line. Okay, so all systems go. We're going to open the valve, get the fresh water running again, and we're going to head up and start the engine back up, make sure everything works. And sometimes I kind of let this run over because you don't know the level that you're going to need of water for the intake, for the impeller, but also it cleans out the bilge while I'm doing this. I'm going to adjust the water level here, and we're going to bring this baby back up to temperature. Actually sounds good. So it's been about maybe 15 minutes, and I've been running the engine at 1700 RPMs. It's been running great. Everything looks good. Our running temperature for when it gets warm is about 140 degrees, so we're really close to that temperature right now. Once we get up to 140, we're going to go and introduce the antifreeze into the system. So we're going to turn off the water, take the hose out. Get it through the whole system. So there's no real need to skimp on it. I just want to make sure that the whole engine gets dry. There's probably an easier way to do this, but I ran up, I killed the engine right here, shut the power off, check in the back. I do have some antifreeze that's down there, so I made sure it came out. It's a lot easier if you have someone else that can tell you, but I know that 2 gallons will get it all into the system. Okay, so the engine is shut down for the season. changed the oil, fuel filters, oil filter, ran antifreeze for the system, got the engine up to temp, made sure it ran twice. And next we're going to double check that dipstick just to make sure that the appropriate level of oil is in there, and if I need to add a little bit more, I can. Again, 2 gallons I used of the antifreeze. So rechecking the dipstick, and you'll notice it's kind of hard to see, but it's just a hair under the line. It's about right there instead of up to that point. So just like I speculated, once the engine ran, got oil into the oil filter, the level dropped a little bit. So I'm going to add just a little bit more oil to the system to make sure that I've got the correct level for next. I'm going to check the belt tension. I'm going to check the antifreeze, which is up here for the system that goes through the heat exchanger. There is a tool that you can buy at any auto parts store that will let you know if your antifreeze within that system is still good, and if it's not, certainly change it. You don't want to do that when the engine's hot, because you'll open that up and it will release a lot of pressure. So that's something you can do in the winter, and then you need to bleed it when you get the engine started again. Again, I'll check the belts, I'll check the hoses, check any electrical components. I definitely need to give this engine a good cleaning, probably this winter. And I need to just kind of go through the boat and clean up the mess that I have also made with all my tools and doing my work here. So that'll be the next process before I put the boat away officially for the winter. Lastly, you got this little zinc that goes on the back of the engine, goes on the heat exchanger. A lot of people forget about this zinc, and you can create a lot of problems with buildup, as well as things that can corrode your engine by not changing this out. It is the only zinc in the engine on this particular engine, and it is very important to change this yearly. On this particular engine, it's located underneath the heat exchanger in the back, in kind of a precarious location, because the transmission and the throttle cable go right around it on my boat. But you can get in there and you can loosen it and then replace it. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a good thing we inspected this. This is only a season old, and it appears it has totally corroded off. I'm not entirely sure why. But that's why we need to replace it. Now we've got our engine winterized. I rechecked the oil on the dipstick, and it was a little bit less. So I added a bit more oil to bring it up to that appropriate level. And we're good to go. The engine has been winterized.